Hi, I'm Genevieve Bos, a tech entrepreneur with a suite of deep tech companies that push the boundaries of what's possible in neuroscience and artificial intelligence. And I'm also an advisor to CWC. Now, today, I have the distinct privilege of introducing you to Dr. Don Wood, who has been successfully treating people since 2015 with dramatically positive results on a suite of challenges from addiction to panic attacks to PTSD and much more. Dr. Wood, you work with many individuals who suffer from substance misuse. Your perspective is very unique in how you approach and support people who are experiencing addiction. Can you talk about that and really set the stage for us of how you see addiction generally?
Sure. Well, Genevieve, I have a very different approach. I see addiction as the symptom of the problem that is actually not the problem. Addiction is really coming in from pain. People have experienced, in most cases, psychological pain, but some people get addicted because of physical pain, painkillers as well. But a lot of time is coming in from that pain. And what I say is addiction is a code. I don't refer to it as a disease. I think that if the person has been experiencing a lot of psychological pain or even physical pain, the substance that they found to stop the pain works. And then what happens is because they repeat it over and over, the brain is just a giant computer. It codes. So it learns that that was a resource that stopped the pain. And then a code starts to build. So I really see it more as a code as opposed to the way the current consensus on addiction is that it's a chronic disorder, relapsing disorder, and that the person is going to have to suffer with this for the rest of their life. Basically, white knuckle it forever. And I see it quite differently. I believe that we can fix it. So if I took your hand, Genevieve, and I started to shake your hand, and I squeezed, and I started squeezing harder and harder and harder to the point that it was so painful you got down on one knee. And then I said, all you have to do is take a drink, and I'll let go. So what was your motive in taking the drink? It wasn't to get the reward of the high, which is a lot of times what people will say is, oh, they're just going out to get high, or they're going out to get drunk. But that's not the primary motive. The primary motive was the relief of pain. So when I let go of your hand and you're not feeling the pain, you're going to get a hit of dopamine because you're going to feel better that the pain went away. But that was not your primary motive. The primary motive was to stop the pain. And so we've got to stop using this shame and guilt on these people, which is the way it's currently, there's a lot of shame involved with addiction and substance misuse. But I say there's nothing wrong with you and there's nothing wrong with your mind. I know exactly why you got into addiction.
So let's talk about pain. Does that pain have to be something you consciously know about? Or could it be something that happened maybe when you were very young and you don't have any conscious memory of it?
Most cases, people know what their pain is. They know they've had trauma in their life, but there may be some of those traumas that are hidden from your conscious awareness. Quite often, people are surprised at things that come up that they didn't think about for a long time. And so those things can happen as well. So trauma has a pretty profound effect on the way the brain works, and it continues in this constant loop. And that's where some people will say they're not aware of it and how it's affecting them, but it is affecting them even below a conscious level.
So talk about the shame and guilt.
A lot of times people think that if I can just shame this person, embarrass this person, it's typical. Even that's what law enforcement would do, right? So somebody gets arrested and their name is in the news, and it's like the purpose of this is to shame them so that they stop this kind of behavior. Shame and guilt are something that is used to try to change a behavior, but it's not very effective. In fact, a lot of times people who are in addiction, it's the shame and guilt that got them into addiction. So
Yeah.
you're making it almost worse by using shame and guilt. Now, I get it because if you've ever had, and some of the people watching this may have a loved one who's been in addiction, and it's frustrating because despite all of your love and all your attempts to support them, they just fly in the face of it and they'll
Yeah.
steal from you, right? They'll lie to you, and that becomes very frustrating. So, a lot of times, the family members get so frustrated that they just get angry and they'll use shame and guilt on them. But it's not very effective, as is pretty evident, right? So, the reason people are in these problems is how well has shame and guilt worked? Not very well.
No. So let's talk about that. I mean, different people are different. One person's extreme pain can be another person's day at the office. But you're saying that in many cases, we're lumping people into one situation or looking at them very similarly. Can you talk more about pain, life experience? You talk about if you walked a mile in someone's shoes.
Yeah, I talk about what is a person's personal set of atmospheric conditions. So, what is the world they've grown up in? So, if they've lived in a world, there's a big study that was done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente called the ACEs study, which really drew the direct correlation between childhood trauma, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and physical and emotional pain. And so if somebody's really led a pretty quiet life, there's not a lot of trauma in their life, there's a chance they could become addicted, about a 3% chance. That could just be that they hung out with the wrong people or got into a lifestyle that wasn't really, good for them. But if somebody's had multiple ACEs, and ACEs can be childhood abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, poverty, there's a number of different ACEs that they could be dealing with. If they've had four or more of those types of ACEs, the possibility of becoming addicted goes to about 16%. So it quadruples. So there's a direct correlation between this childhood trauma and the pain that they're experiencing and getting into substance abuse.
So let's go there again. Do you believe substance misuse is a disease?
No, I don't believe it's a disease. I believe it's a code. So I understand why the disease model is used. It certainly allows it to get in more into the medical field to be able to help people, get treated. But I don't believe it's necessarily a disease. I think people are capable of breaking out of this, just like a computer. If every time I hit the M key on my computer shut off, I wouldn't say I've got a bad computer. I'd have a coding problem. Why is the M key shutting off the computer? So if I want to fix it, I don't want to have to work around the M key. So if somebody said, well, just don't touch the M key, which is what we're doing with people in substance misuse, don't touch it, stay away from it, don't hang out with those people. That's not the solution to the problem. The solution is to find out what's the code that got into the computer to shut off the computer by hitting the M key. That's not a disease, that's a code, which is a very different way of looking at it. And it takes a lot of the shame and guilt out of it. So if you had pain and every time you took that drug or you took that drink and the pain stopped, what is your brain learning? That stopped the pain. Now, the subconscious mind is where the issue comes in. If this was a conscious issue, if your conscious mind was in charge of that, nobody would be addicted because the logical part of your brain, the reasonable part of your brain would know the difference between right and wrong. But the subconscious, which is really in charge of survival, operates in the present. Everything for your subconscious is now. So because of that, if your subconscious, which runs the survival mode, can't see time, is it possible that it can see a consequence to an action? It's impossible. You have to understand time in order to see a consequence. So your subconscious operates in the present. There's no such thing as time. That resource stopped my pain. And when did it stop it? Now. Problem solved. That's the way the mind sees it. But then every time you use it, you've now added a code. And we can call that a neural pathway as well. That's really
Right.
what it is. And I say code, it's the same kind of thing as a neural pathway. I'm building a neural pathway.
Okay, so that sounds super challenging to fix. How do we crack the code? How are we supposed to heal when you've built these neural pathways that have worked for you, right? To get rid of the pain. Are we supposed to medicate our way through this for the rest of our lives?
Well,
What's the approach?
currently that's the solution, right? Is to medicate it or teach people to build a new neural pathway. So
Okay.
what they'll say is, okay, you can't be around alcohol. Don't be around alcohol at all. Keep alcohol out of your house. Don't be going to bars. Don't hang out with your friends that drink all the time. That's trying to build a new neural pathway. So your mind, basically, our minds are habit forming. It builds habits to keep you safe. It forms behaviors to keep you safe. People will say to me, "Oh, I sabotage myself." And what I say is, it's impossible. Our brains are survival based. It's impossible to sabotage that. It's going to try to keep you alive. Now, it may look like it's sabotage because now all of a sudden you're moving in this new direction. And why am I going in that direction when I was on a really good path this way? It's because your mind's trying to avoid pain. So the code that gets built is repetition, is like research. That's the way the brain sees it. So if I repeat something over and over, just like a neural pathway, think about even a path walking through a field, right? So if you walk the same path, you eventually build a path to go down. So the grass is trampled down. It's easier to walk through that grass when you've taken the grass out of the way by walking over it. That's a neural pathway. So then the brain is going to go to the easiest pathway that has been built for it. The problem is if you don't solve what caused the pain, so you can build a new neural pathway, which people will say, I've been sober now for 20 years. But if they didn't get to the root cause, which could have been those ACEs from childhood, that fire is burning in the background and it could ignite because the original source of the neural pathway was the pain or the trauma. So if somebody had a really bad childhood, abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, that's running in the background. If that doesn't get resolved, just building a pathway, a new pathway, has not solved the problem. It's a workaround. It's like avoid the M key, build a new way to write. Just don't write words with M's in them.
So what you're saying is in collectively that if you have trauma, it literally is interfering with the body's ability to heal, right? So one thing that you mentioned um, in an example is when we get scared, we have to run, and what happens to our face. Can you talk about the physiological reaction
Yeah.
that when you're talking about real time feeling,
So
understanding the trauma?
sure. So from my research, what I found is trauma creates inflammation. That's the response to trauma, whether it's physical or emotional. So the inflammation is a protection system, right, to protect the system. So when the inflammation comes up, that's a temporary pause to protect it. But what inflammation does is it compromises the immune system and compromises your neurotransmitters. So temporarily, most of the attention is now going to this trauma, right? Not to fixing anything. So even physiologically, what you were just talking about is when we go into a sympathetic response, the blood flow is going to the muscle groups. So the purpose of that is to become stronger. It works very well in the animal world, for example. So if a rabbit is eating and a wolf shows up, what's going to happen to the rabbit? It's going to go from hunger to fear. So the sympathetic nervous system will be engaged, will be activated. And that's one of the things I always want to mention too. I never use the word trigger. I never liked that word. I always use activate. Why would the nervous system be activated? because there's a threat,
Survival. Yeah.
survival. So the rabbit now is activated into an activation. So the blood flow now is not going to go to the stomach area to digest this food. It's going to go to the muscle groups, to the extremities, so that the rabbit is alert, motivated, and strong. So the rabbit will take off because it's stronger now, faster now. It's got more blood flow and oxygen. Gets into his rabbit hole. He can't see the wolf, hear the wolf, or smell the wolf. What's going to happen to fear? It's going to go away. Perfectly designed system. Rabbit will come back out of his hole and start looking for something to eat again. Well, we have that same system, except we store the information about the wolves. So for us, it's that trauma loop. It's perpetual wolf because we store explicit details about events and experiences. This is what's causing what I call the glitches and error messages in the way our mind is perceiving the environment we're living in. So and there's where trauma shows up. If you've had a traumatic event, for example, an auto accident that you had years ago, and then you get into a situation that looks like that auto accident again. Maybe it was a white van that hit you, and all of a sudden your heart's pounding in your chest. Why would your heart be pounding? That van's not going to hit you. It's on the other side of the road. But your mind looks at the memory of that accident from 10 years ago, and it activates your nervous system. No animal can do that. Only humans store that much detail about these events. So our nervous system keeps getting activated. We're going into this response on a constant basis. That's going to wear down the system. Your fight or flight response is supposed to be an emergency management system, and it is for animals, but it isn't for humans, because if you've had a lot of trauma, it keeps turning on, and then that puts you into this sympathetic nervous system response even when nothing is happening. Activated.
Dr. Wood, what I'm hearing you say is that the emergency management system in your body should not be ongoing. It should be essentially a temporary safety survival system. But somehow the trauma of a particular situation is affecting us longer term. So, can you explain how that works and how that leads to addiction?
Sure. So I explain it this way. If I asked you what you ate for dinner last night, can you explain to me what you ate for dinner?
Yes.
What'd you have?
Onion soup.
Onion soup? So
Yep.
when I asked you that, you probably saw where you were eating the soup, what the soup
I
looked
did.
like. You saw some pictures of that, right?
I did.
So that's how you stored the information about your dinner last night. No animal does that, only humans. We store details about events and experiences. Animals have one memory system. They learn through association and repetition. If you repeat something over and over, an animal will learn to associate that, but they don't know the details of it. But we store tremendous detail about events and experiences. Now, last night's dinner was a pretty routine dinner. It wasn't very traumatic or disturbing. So it was stored, but with not a lot of details. But if that was a threatening, traumatic event, all your senses are heightened: sight, smell, hearing. So how's it going to record it? High def.
Oh,
Tremendous amounts of detail in that memory. That's what keeps activating your nervous system. So if something looks like, sounds like, smells like an event that was traumatic for you 20 years ago, and you're now in a situation where your mind sees that information again, our minds are designed to protect us. So how does it protect us? It goes into memory to say, what did we do last time when we experienced this? And here's where the glitch shows up. When it goes into that memory to start looking at it as a resource to respond to the current situation, it actually starts reading it in real time. It thinks that event from 20 years ago is happening now. Then it goes into a full-blown sympathetic response, and you can't stop that. There's no logic and reason of the conscious mind that can override that. It's an autonomic nervous system response, but there's nothing happening. It's just information about an event from 20 years ago. So you can see what's going to happen. If that's constantly getting turned on, that's going to affect our not only our mental health, it's also going to affect our physical health. So that sympathetic, the vagus nerve will get activated. It's going to tell the body that we're in a threat mode. All the systems are going to go in. You're going to go out of the parasympathetic into sympathetic. So your rest and digest ends. And, I always say people in sort of a funny way of looking at it, when we get really nervous and we feel like we have to go to the bathroom, that's because the system's going to dump the weight. It wants to run and it's got to get rid of it. So then we feel like
Right.
we have to go to the bathroom. That's because the system is saying, we don't need to digest this food right now. We're going to be lunch if we don't get out of here, right? It's still seeing that threat as the lion that's attacking. So it wants to get rid of that so it can run faster and protect itself. And the blood flow that would be used in the stomach is now got to be diverted into the muscle groups to run faster. So that's just the system, the physiological system. But if that's going off all the time, even when nothing is happening, how do I stop it? Well, I know how we can stop it the best way, which is to get the trauma resolved. But if you don't know that and you're just constantly in this pain, but every time you take a drink or you put that needle in your arm and it stops that pain, now your mind's not doing that Google search anymore looking for danger. We're numbing it. But that's not a good thing because it's like taking the security guard out of the front door, right? And now anybody can walk in. And so there's where when people, start getting drunk or they start getting high, right? Their guard is so far down that they'll drive a car, they'll do crazy things because there's no filter anymore. There's no protection system. We knocked out the guard.
You've said before that we're 95% subconscious and 5% conscious, and that our 5% simply cannot override the survival threat because our subconscious takes over. And I think you just said, well, the drugs and alcohol or whatever it may be blocks the access to those traumatic memories. Can you talk about how um, someone can, is it one trauma that can do this? Is it a number of traumas? How can we identify what those traumas are and how can we heal?
The great part about this is we can heal. The traumas are basically creating this response in real time over and over and over. So the reason why I asked you what you ate for dinner last night is I was trying to get a reference to when you thought about dinner last night, you didn't feel any emotion, right? It was just like you could just explain what you had for dinner last night.
Oh, happiness. I had happiness.
Okay. But if that was a traumatic event, right, you would have immediately felt, if I had asked you about something that happened to you, tell me that situation that happened to you when you were 5, and your
Okay.
heart started pounding in your chest. That's because your mind was looking at that memory in real time and in high
Wow.
definition. Hollywood has made trillions of dollars from this. We can go into a movie, know it's a movie. The logical part of the brain, the 5%, conscious mind goes, oh, that's a movie. But the 95% goes, the dog's going to die. Do something, right? So anytime you have an emotion, a feeling, or a sensation, your mind is calling for an action. It wants you to do something. The purpose of fear is to escape a threat. The purpose of anger is to attack a threat. So if you were telling me about a trauma that you had 10 years ago and you start to cry, that makes no sense. Why would you be crying about something that happened 10 years ago? Why would you be feeling fear about something that happened 10 years ago? There's no
We're
action.
reliving it.
Yeah, but there's no action you can take. So what we can do is we can take that traumatic information that's been stored in high definition and get your mind to reprocess it into the same type of format as what you ate for dinner last night. When we take the intensity out of it, now you can describe it without the emotion. Now, we're not trying to make it happy. So it was a bad situation. We're not going for happy. It makes sense if somebody's sad that something happened to them. But what we're stopping is the dysregulation of the nervous system, the activation of the nervous system. So somebody should be able to say, this happened to me when I was a child without crying and shaking about it, right? So are we sad about that? Sure, it was a sad thing. But is there an action you can take? No. So we don't need an activation of our nervous system. Our sympathetic response should not be going off when we're talking about that. So you can see if that's constantly going off because a person's had this trauma, and the only way they have found to stop it is to use drugs or alcohol. Why are we shaming them? How could they
Right,
have done it any different? They couldn't have. It'd be impossible. Nobody wants to live with that pain.
right. Thank you. So let's switch gears for a moment. We're all aware of how substance misuse affects the individual, but there's also the family, right? For some of us, perhaps the family could have been part of the problem. In other cases, they're incredibly supportive. Uh, can you talk a little bit about your advice around someone who's suffering from substance misuse and the family?
Sure. So a lot of times they'll say the family are enablers, right? And so what they mean by that is the family doesn't fight anymore. They just sort of let it go on. But why is the family doing that? Because it's painful to fight every day. So if you're constantly in this struggle, right? I have to lock my doors. I have to be careful. I've got to just, where are they now? What are they doing now? And then it's like the person says, well, I'm just going to go to the bar and I'm going to only have one drink, right? Well, the family are like, okay, like, do you want to spend the next 2 hours fighting about this? Or do you want to just let them go and hope they only have one drink? So the family are just exhausted when somebody's in this misuse issue. And you understand that. So there's a lot of frustration. The issue then sometimes comes in is when the person is getting out of this addictive situation and they're healing. The family didn't heal with them. So now the family still has that anger and frustration. So here's this person trying to rebuild their life, and they're constantly being reminded about, oh, yeah, you're going to go out again. Yeah, I know what's going to happen. You're going to go get drunk again, or you're going to go get high again, or you keep hanging out with Johnny, and Johnny's a bad person, and so we know what that means. So they keep that pressure on them. Well, that's sometimes what got them into the misuse in the beginning. So the family also needs to heal. It's not just the person. And so if that environment, and a lot of times we see that, you can start to heal and then they go back into the same environment. It's almost, I don't know if you ever heard of that analogy where they talk about a person has this plant in the garden, but the plant is dying and they love this plant. So they find this ad about bring your plant in and we'll fix it in 30 days. And so you bring your plant in and you say, they tell you come back in 30 days, and you come back in 30 days and it's flowering, it's green, it looks amazing. And you say, oh, that's great. I'm going to go put this back in the garden. And then the person who fixed your plant goes, oh, don't do that, right? There's no nutrition. There's no water, right? To put it back in the same place, it's going to die again. So the environment has to change along with the person changing, or it's going to be very difficult for them to truly heal. And
So,
that's
what
where
you're
the
saying,
family.
if you're treating somebody who's going through substance misuse, and they go into back into a family environment that has the core belief that that person can never heal, it can become self-fulfilling.
100%. And if they're constantly reminded that, okay, you're white knuckling this every day, right? When I work with people in addiction and I say to them, there's nothing wrong with you, you're not broken, you're not defeated. I know exactly why you started to get into addiction and you can beat this. I guess the best one, I had somebody one time say to me, he says, the difference between coming out of rehab and coming out of the program that you do is that I don't think about it anymore. But when I got out of rehab, I couldn't stop thinking about it because that's what is instilled in them. You have to
Hmm.
fight this every day for the rest of your life. And I say that's not true. It's basically the symptom. It was never the problem. The addiction is the symptom of the problem. The problem is trauma, right? Trauma or, they had physical pain, which could have been an accident, or they had emotional pain, which could have been the traumas. If you don't get to that root cause, you're never going to resolve the problem.
So, Dr. Wood, there are many organizations that have a long history of trying to help substance misuse. And part of their requirement is that you make an announcement about yourself being an addict every day.
Right.
Uh, I believe you said very clearly that you have a different perspective on that. Can you talk about that a little bit, and then what advice would you have for someone who's suffering with addiction for themselves?
So I'm very respectful of what AA and NA do because I know the intention of it is to heal these people and help these people. But I don't believe that they should be standing up every day for the rest of their life and saying, "Hi, I'm Don, I'm an alcoholic." Because what they're doing is reinforcing that they're still an alcoholic. So that to me is just knowing how the brain works. The brain is going to build a belief that I'm an alcoholic. What does that mean? I can never not be an alcoholic. What I say is alcoholism and drug addiction or substance misuse is the symptom. So do symptoms go away? Yes, when you heal it. So why don't we heal it and then the substance, right, is no longer required? And so if the substance is no longer required because the pain is no longer there, isn't that the definition of healing? I don't need it anymore. I'm not in pain anymore, right? Healing, if you came in with a broken leg and we reset your leg, right? But every day I have to tell everybody, I've just got a broken leg for the rest of my life, right? You would never
Right.
say that. You say, well, no, it took a few weeks, but my leg healed. Our minds and bodies are designed to heal. What's interfering with the healing is the loop of trauma that keeps it in a constant state of stress. And how well do you heal when you're stressed? Not that well. Most of the energy is going to this trauma loop in this constant fight or flight situation, and less is going to the healing modalities. So your mind doesn't want to heal. If you're being chased by a bear and you're in bare feet and you're running on jagged rocks, you will be able to run full speed without feeling the pain because your mind is going to say, we don't need to be doing maintenance right now. We need to be running because we're going to, if this bear catches us, it's over. So why would you want to know about pain at that point? You don't. But as soon as you escape, what's going to happen? Now the system's going to go into maintenance mode and start the healing process. But it's not going to be doing the healing process during the chase. And as long as trauma's looping, you're in the chase and you don't get out of it. So what I say is we need to fix that first before we start working on the codes. Because you get that out of the way, how much easier is it going to be now to modify the codes when you don't have the old loop constantly activating the system, pulling you back from it?
Wow. Well, this has been incredibly enlightening and very promising for the future of literally healing substance misuse forever and giving people hope, families, caregivers, and individuals that have just literally been suffering and feeling terrible about themselves and know that they don't have to call themselves an addict for the rest of their lives. They can start creating new neural pathways by what they say to themselves and understand more about their own psychological um, well being to help take control of it. Dr. Don, and excuse me, Dr. Wood, any last words?
One of the things that I say to everybody when they come in, doesn't matter what situation they're in, and you've heard me say this a number of times, and I have people cry when I say this to them. there's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with your mind. I know exactly why you're in this misuse issue, right? But it's not coming from your character, morals, willpower, ethics. It's coming from pain. So why don't we get to the pain first, get that out of the way? So again, I can use the broken leg analogy. If you came in with a broken leg and we just gave you painkillers, but we never reset the leg, you're going to be able to walk out of that hospital without feeling the pain and think you're better, right? But you're not better because you'll be back the next day when the pain comes back. So the key is to fix the problem from the very beginning, and that is the solution.
Well, I think every individual who's ever dealt with any kind of addiction, substance misuse should hear this message, and their families and the people who love them. Thank you, Dr. Wood.
Thank you.